ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to another amazing episode of In the Zone, my little Learn of League of Legends show to teach you guys how to be a better summoner and to teach me how to talk, because I have a very big weekend ahead of me, and teach me also how to knock my webcam off the monitor over there. But welcome one and all to another wonderful episode of In the Zone, episode 34 to be proper, and in fact, been doing this for almost a year, and pretty happy with some of the results. We'll get to a little bit about later about why I got a little excited myself. But anyway, hope everybody is in for a wonderful weekend of League of Legends treatment. Of course, we have MLG Raleigh coming up this weekend, which myself and fellow ggC member / owner, Mr. Monte Cristo, will be casting at, as well as having an awesome slew of teams to participate in it, and an awesome cast of casters to come back once again. Looking forward to working with D-Man as well as Dan Din, as we did at the League of Legends Arena, and getting a chance to work with Jat and Jaws is going to be fantastic. Those Riot guys, always an awesome pleasure to work with them. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, aside from the pleasantries that we have coming up this weekend, we have a couple things to discuss that have been floating around the community before we really kind of, once again, my webcam, I'm going to do this over here. There we go. We have a couple things to discuss that have been floating around the community that you guys may want to know about before we actually go into MLG Raleigh. So it's probably going to be, hopefully not as long as last week's In the Zone was, because that went way too long, and kind of did not want that to happen to you, everybody out there. But other than that, we have a couple things to talk about before MLG Raleigh really kicks into full gear, just to get a couple of clarification things going down. Now, one of the things that is going to happen at MLG Raleigh is a lot of the people have been talking about the fact that, well, two of the top teams in North America are not going to be there, both Team Solo Middle and CLG North America are not going to be able to attend, which we'll touch upon a little bit later in the episode. But this has kind of gotten around to the throwing around the fact of the term cheese in League of Legends. And cheese is something that really came to prominence in the StarCraft 2 community, or StarCraft community, actually, with Brood War. Actually came from the Korean term for cheaters, which when you say it really quickly on a Brood War stream, comes out as Chizu. So a lot of people started calling it cheese, or like a cheap strategy. And that's basically how it kind of took on. But the term has been thrown around very, very loosely in the League of Legends community, and this is usually attributed to the fact that League of Legends has a very broad audience that isn't necessarily brought up from the same esports culture that the Brood War and StarCraft 2 community came from, or not even the same kind of culture that like the Counter-Strike or Quake people are familiar with. These are a bunch of new people to the scene of esports, so terminology is sometimes kind of lost on them. So what I really wanted to do is just clarify very quickly what cheese exactly is, how it's been employed in the past in games like StarCraft and StarCraft 2, and what can we expect to be cheese strategies, and really dissect what cheese is and how it's going to affect the overall tournament scene come MLG Raleigh, and then the following PAX Prime North American regional qualifiers, and then of course the Season 2 finals are going to be in Los Angeles towards the middle end of October. So anyway, very, very quickly, heading over to the screen, we're going to get an awesome definition of cheese provided to us by Team Liquid's Liquipedia. Cheese most often is going to refer to an unexpected strategy that relies in large parts on either a lack of information or a psychological impact on your opponent. Cheese build orders are typically going to revolve around an early attack that, if undetected, is more difficult to defend than it is to execute. So just very, very quickly, looking at the definition of cheese right here, it's easy to do. If it's undetected, it deals massive amounts of damage, or tons of damage if you're a Freak fan, and it leaves some sort of lasting impact on the mind state of your opponent. So it's not necessarily, most of the time in StarCraft 2, it's going to be an all-out kill. However, not all the time in League of Legends is it going to be something that just automatically ends the game right then and there. It's going to be something that leaves more of this lasting impression and garners your team an early game advantage. Something that's going to give your team like 1,000 to 2,000 gold advantage less than 10 minutes into the game, which is a huge amount in League of Legends. We talk about all the time while we're in the middle of casting games, how a couple hundred gold is not really that big of a difference, or it's not going to really have them pull apart or whatever. And when you get into the mid to late stages of the game, 5,000 to 6,000 gold, then 10,000 gold is pretty much an insurmountable kind of lead. If you're going into the 10-minute mark, which is still kind of considered the early stages of the game, and you're ahead by 2,000 or 3,000 gold, that is ridiculous. That is insane. That means you have some sort of big pivotal advantage over your opponent, whether it's map presence and map dominance through the issue of pushing towers, whether you are completely dominating your lane by playing aggressive while farming a ridiculous rate, or you're controlling dragons and have basically gotten a very early dragon and perhaps perhaps even a second dragon before around the 10-minute mark has been brought up anyway. So you're gaining some sort of ridiculous advantage to catapult your team into this state of being ahead, or into this mind state that your opponent's kind of like, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to react to this? Which is something we see very, very often out of the North American scene whenever something new is introduced, which kind of leads to the people saying, well, oh, okay, this strategy hasn't been done before. It has to be cheese. Not necessarily. What we're going to do is take a quick look at some examples of cheese that have been used in the StarCraft 2 community. Now, what you guys have done, if you've already been involved with StarCraft for a little while, you're going to kind of just like roll your eyes and be like, oh yeah, Optimus Tom, I know all about this, blah, 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 blah. However, not a lot of people know, so an example of cheese in a strategic game like StarCraft 2 is going to be something that's executed very quickly. If it's undetected, it's going to be extremely difficult to defend against, and, well, it's going to leave some sort of impact on your opponent. And these are strategies that you could basically win a game with. There's one for each of the three main races of StarCraft: Zerg, Protoss, and Terran. So we're going to be looking at prominent examples of those very quickly. We have the Cannon Rush for Protoss, we have the Six Pool for Zerg, and we have the Proxy Barracks Bunker Rush, technically, for the Terran player. So very quickly, I want to give a quick shout out to Force StarCraft 2 Strategies. You guys can go check them out on YouTube. They have a pool of subscribers, in addition to the fact that they have really, really awesome content, not only StarCraft 2 related. They have they have some League of Legends stuff as well, but in addition to that, they have a lot of different gameplay videos, which is really, really cool. They basically, if you type into Google a demo for one of these strategies, they're one of the first results. So it's really, really cool. But basically, what these strategies are, this is a six pool, and it's some sort of strategy that if you defend against it, your opponent is going to be at a significant economic disadvantage, whereas if you don't defend against it, you're pretty much going to lose the game, or your opponent's going to be at some sort of insurmountable advantage. So as a Zerg player, you're going to be starting off with 5 drones, and what you're going to be doing is making 6 of them, waiting until you get 200 minerals, and then you're going to be starting on your spawning pool. Then you're going to be making very minimal amounts of drones so you can power out as many Zergling offensive units as quickly as possible. You're also going to want to scout very, very early with not only an Overlord, but also wind up sending a drone, wherever that is. So you can just scout your opponent as quickly as possible to make sure you know where they are. Because unlike League of Legends, StarCraft matches don't always have the same people in the same spot, unless it's a 2-player map such as this one, which is not used anymore because it was a very bad map. But anyway, you're going to be doing some sort of harass to your opponent with your scout to keep them on their toes and prevent them from obviously doing what they want to do. You can see the Protoss player here wanted to put down a gateway, and in that case, he's going to be able to start making his own offensive units. Because the gateway isn't even down yet, this 6 pool is going to be massively effective. The Protoss player sees the Zerglings coming out of the base while he puts down his gateway and realizes a little bit too late what exactly is going on. Now, the Protoss player has no offensive units whatsoever, just worker units. So you can see how this 6 pool is a very, very effective strategy, and how that if this succeeds, the opponent's not going to be able to do anything at all. You can see right now, Zerglings stream into the base. The opponent is probably going to say a couple little, actually a little bit manner right here. This is a good game. You're able to take out your opponent's base. Oh, you go 6 pool. So we identified the strategy in and of himself, and, well, you're put at an advantage, and you wind up winning the game. Very quick, cheesy, in the fact that it's kind of lame, but at the same time, it's still a very effective strategy, and it works. Another example of this is going to be the Cannon Rush, something that Protoss will do. Protoss is a different kind of race. They're able to warp in buildings and let the worker kind of run away and do whatever they want to do while the building is building. Cannon Rush is going to involve yourself getting a little bit more of an economic start. You need a pylon in order to power your buildings, but in addition to this, going to increase your supply cap. Once your pylon is finished, you're going to want to move out a little bit with this probe to scout once again like we did with our drone, but you're also going to want to build a forge. A forge allows you to upgrade your army's weapons, shields, and armor, but in addition to this, you're also going to be able to build cannons, which is a defensive unit, cannot move, but it's a detection from stealth units. In addition to this, it also has a range damaging attack. So when you find your opponent on a map such as this one, you are going to put down one of those mobile fields, a pylon. So you can now build buildings around this pylon when it finishes. Why do you want to do that? Well, photon cannons are a building. The Terran player, a little bit too late, is scouting that this forge is here while you're starting to build photon cannons in his base. By putting one down here, the Terran units, which are range attackers called Marines, are not just going to be able to sit back and wail away on this one. They're actually going to be at risk of being hit by this cannon down here. So you can see the Terran player is going to react by trying to pull all his workers off the line here and frantically stop the photon cannon rush. It is going to work on this one right here. However, the one on the bottom is already finishing, and now all of these worker units are at risk of dying. Very, very dangerous here. If this probe gets caught at all, then you're going to wind up not having a unit to build anything, and the rush is foiled. So you're going to have to be very, very careful about this Marine over here and try to micro your unit as much as possible so that the Marine just doesn't die. The Marine doesn't kill your probe. It actually dies to this cannon on the low ground. So you can see here, the Terran player is struggling to do anything he can to try to come back from this cannon rush. He's constantly putting down more pylons to keep these units powered, and even though the Marines here are coming out one by one to try to stop it, the photon cannon rush is too successful, and well, you can see that sometimes people get very mad at cheese strategies. That's just something that happens, and is a little bit of a cause of why people find cheese strategies a little bit too cheap. One quick other example for the Terran race really quickly before we get into how this affects League of Legends is going to be the proxy barracks bunker rush, which actually going to be demonstrated by the little one against Daimaga. Interesting, Daimaga, member of MTW. We didn't know. There was a little article posted not that long ago about how MTWNA, former picture of a goose, actually became Monomaniac Esports, or Monomaniac Esports recently, about a couple hours ago. So it's really, really cool. Check that out on ggChronicle.com. It has a link to the official statement released by Monomaniac as well. But same kind of thing, making sure you're getting a decent economy going with your SCVs, your worker units. You're going to want to build a supply depot eventually, so you can not only continue to make SCVs, but you can then build your barracks. By putting your barracks outside of your base, you're closing distance to where your opponent is going to be. So you can see right here, proxy barracks. Then you can just make a bunch of Marines. In addition to this, SCVs can build defensive structures called bunkers, which you can hide the Marines in, and it will shield them with basically a house for them. So that house is going to have extra armor, extra hit points, and the Marines cannot die while inside it. You have to kill the bunker first. So you can see, we're going to send 2 SCVs, because these can not only repair buildings, but repair each other. And you're going to have a little bit of a micro-war here between the Marines, the SCVs, and the drones. Now, this is a fast expand from the Zerg as well, which means that if he scouted the fact that there's a proxy barracks going on, he wouldn't have been as much pressure. He would have just built a spawning pool and then built Zerglings and not sunken colonies, but spine crawlers. That is the name for StarCraft 2. It shows how long it's been since I've actually played StarCraft 2. But you'll be able to build spine crawlers and just defend against this. But what's going to happen here is the Terran player is going to be very aggressive, start building bunkers in the base. You see that the hatchery actually gets canceled because this is coming on. He tries to frantically build some sort of defenses against it, building a bunker in the base, and the little one's just going to march in and be able to take out your opponent without much resistance. Even though he had the spawning pool down, there's no way in time that he could get his offensive units or his defensive structures up in time, and the little one just waltzes in and takes an easy victory. These are what we consider cheese strategies in the world of StarCraft. Something that is pretty cheap, easy to execute, and if you catch your opponent off guard, it's devastating. As we saw in all 3 of those examples, our opponent had absolutely no clue that it was going to happen, and then because of this, they just lost outright to it. Now, League of Legends is going to be a little bit different. The cheese strategy is going to give you some sort of advantage where your opponent still has a chance to come back, but it's going to be very, very difficult for them to do so, and they're going to have some ridiculous coordination in order to pull it off. A cheese strategy in League of Legends is something I would kind of put akin to what Black did to TSM in the 3rd game of the MLG League of Legends arena, although they executed it rather poorly. So we're going to jump over to the VODs for MLG, and I'll explain what Black is doing and how it kind of relates to the StarCraft kind of cheese philosophy. I'll say philosophy, strategy, methods, whatever you want to call it. See if the MLG VOD wants to play for me.
Do they make something happen
right,
here?
Awesome. So what we have here is, even though it's not the best quality in the world, bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, Black is going to be going for what we think is a jungle invade. But taking a quick look at their summoner spells, realize that something is up. We have 2 instances of teleport on the support and the presumed solo top. There are no smites on their team, so originally we think, okay, support Gangplank is a little unorthodox, but so is Caitlyn as a range carry. Graze and Blitzcrank is a rather standard lane, and Twisted Fate, he could kind of push with some power to his cards. You know, this is not the most common kind of King composition. It's a little unorthodox. But what Black does with this composition is something you really don't see out of League of Legends teams. In a move that is very similar to what we would say Axe from Defense of the Ancients does, they are going to actually stay in this bush over here until minions spawn, which would be right now. So TSM is coming in to kind of counter-invade because they don't know what's up. They don't recognize the fact that there's no smite on the enemy team. They think maybe it's a jungle gangplank. We don't know exactly what's going on. Solo top AD character, not uncommon. But TSM's going to find that, they're not here, and Black springs their plan into action. They take out the waves and minions behind the tower, which leaves their minions no contesting whatsoever as they continue to push towards the middle, which is the middle lane first tower from TSM. Reginald goes back to try to farm up and realizes, holy crap, there's 5 of them here. By using these minions as meat shields, Black is able to just attack the tower at will. Dyrus comes in to try to do something, and Black's going to try to pick up first blood on him, which they do successfully. Continuing to keep these minions here, though, they're going to use teleport to give the minions invulnerability in order to tank more shots from this tower. We can see that Svenskeren right here as Gangplank's continuing to do this. A little bit ill-advised, though, because TSM is here to try to stop this. They actually pick up the kill on Gangplank, but look at the aggression from Black. They picked up 2 kills for 1, including first blood, and look how low the tower is. Ezreal and Nunu here are facing down 4 members of Black at level 1, which is never the best. You know, that's not a Zingy right there. That is Face Roller. But he's actually going to get taken down by some tower aggro. But properly executed, this strategy would have net them 3, if not more, kills. And on top of this, the tower extremely early on. 3 minutes into the game, they've already almost taken down the first middle tower. One thing that they don't do, however, is they don't recognize Dyrus up top trying to farm, and they don't recognize Shyvana, the jungler from Team Solo Middle, is also farming. So what they are on here is a clock. With Gangplank respawning, they're able to use the raise morale and take down the tower. They really want to pick up a kill on Reginald here, who's actually still only level 1, whereas most of the members of Black are level 2 now, except for the Gangplank who died, giving the first kill to TSM. So what Black has done here is executed pretty much a successful quote-unquote cheese strategy for League of Legends. They've identified an early game weakness and exploited it. Look at this. Basically 3.5 minutes into the game, Black is ahead of TSM by 1.1k gold. Even though they're down in farm to members like Dyrus and Odd1, Odd1 is basically taking farm away from the bottom lane and is trying to push it in response. Dyrus on the top lane is just trying to push and farm up to get himself a little bit beefier. What Black fails to do here is go back to a normal laning phase. With the double top and double bottom in this composition, it would have been absolutely insane. Dyrus would have been pressured to not being able to farm whatsoever, whereas the bottom lane would have had no kind of consequence whatsoever facing off against the support character and the range character. If Odd1 wanted to camp top lane, it was only going to ever make it a 2 versus 2. So one can kind of argue that, okay, if they picked maybe more of a passive support like a Janna to go with this Blitzcrank, not only would they have gotten the shield of the Howling Gale at level 1, but they would have had a little more standard AD support composition on both fronts, and then maybe someone along the lines of Morgana in that mid lane to push it down a little bit more, or maybe taking Karthus for themselves to have that global presence of the ultimate kind of flying around. And if they'd gone back to a standard laning phase, they would have been ahead in every single lane by gold, if not down by a little bit of experience. But like I said, having those certain advantages to their team composition, they would have been able to just match TSM and come out ahead come the mid game and hopefully carry that over into the late game. On top of this, having someone else, say, in the bottom lane, having that Blitzcrank move motion towards the mid lane or the top lane, they could have continued to push down multiple towers in a lane, garner some sort of advantage, and keep Shyvana on her toes. Now, what happens in this game is actually Black does not execute the strategy entirely properly, and they wind up actually continuing to push down this mid lane and being out-leveled by Dyrus from the top lane, who eventually comes in to help out with a little bit of a level advantage. But in addition to this, they wind up losing out to the fact that the Odd One hits level 6, uses his ultimate to drag the rest of the team into TSM, and then TSM uses the superior AoE and just superior teamfight tactics to take down Black. So what would have been a ridiculous, awesome early cheese strategy winds up kind of falling apart on them because they're not able to capitalize on their own advantage. This is one way you can counteract cheese strategies by by identifying what's going on and trying to figure out what can counter this. TSM did a great job farming up their jungler and farming up their top laner a little bit so that they had one tanky person that the underfarmed and less tanky members of Black weren't able to deal with, and then having one member come in at a ridiculous level advantage and just decimate the entirely under-leveled team of Black. Now, as I was saying before, if Black had executed this strategy a little bit differently, taken down the tower, net that advantage, and then went back to a safe play style, that would have been a perfectly executed Cheese strategy. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that properly, and they wound up losing the game because it just unravels from there as they try to force this weird all-middle kind of strategy with their menagerie of champions that they did select. So what originally looked like to be a very, very cool strategy, unfortunately kind of fell apart on the behalf of Black. Something else that people have been really throwing around recently is the Dignitas triple support composition. And by our standard definition of cheese, according to Leaguepedia, what it's really going to be is some sort of early method that garners some point of advantage that's going to be very, very difficult for the enemy team to combat. Now, as we dissected very heavily in the Zone episode 22, which is one of the reasons I was really excited, if you just Google Dignitas support composition, in the Zone 22 is the first video that comes up with, which is awesome. Really, very awesome. But in addition to this, Dignitas' support composition was late game centric. It didn't really give them any advantages in the early game. If anything, it gave them disadvantages in the early game because they had no real huge damage output until mid game, when you had a support Soraka and a Lulu who, with a little bit of farm, were able to do some nasty things. Original pre-nerf Lulu in that top lane did nasty, nasty amounts of damage, so maybe there's a little bit of potential for jungle ganks up there to garner some sort of advantage in that top lane. So maybe the Lulu top was a little bit cheesy, but later on in the game, it was a late game team comp centered around the fact that maybe there was one Ignite on the enemy team. They did it against CLG. Fortunately, I couldn't find any VODs for it, which is really strange. I don't know why. It was at IPL 4, so I kind of figured there'd be some VODs available. But regardless of that fact, they played it against CLGNA, and CLGNA had no response to it. I don't know if there were one or more Ignites being run on the team or what, but by taking advantage of something like that, they were able to have a Soraka with triple heal, double shields from Janna and Lulu, heal from Janna. In addition to this, they had Mundo, who was poking away at the weakened magic resistance from the rest of the team. Ridiculous amounts of slows, silences, knockups, everything going down, and a team that really was pretty resistant to crowd control. So it was a late game strategy more than an early game cheese composition. Although, be it a little bit gimmicky, it wasn't necessarily fit under the traditional definition of cheese. One other thing that people have been kind of considering cheese strategy is going to be the Azubu Blaze, let's push down towers no matter what our team comp is kind of strategy. And albeit it is a little bit cheesy, it's kind of cheese and kind of not. As we covered in episode 32 of Azubu Blaze, of In the Zone with Azubu Blaze, once again, you type in Azubu Blaze tower push, and episode 32 of In the Zone is the first result, which is fantastic and awesome because it means that even though the videos don't have ridiculous amounts of views, that people are really getting out their feedback, so I love you guys. But anyway, having Azubu Blaze come in and push down towers, they didn't really have a composition like Black did. They didn't really go in with gimmicky summoner spells like teleport. They didn't really go in and do any weird character choices. Their team compositions were fairly standard. Like I said, if you watch episode 32 of In the Zone, we would break down the fact that Azubu Blaze is basically picking similar compositions to the rest of the world right now. With like Graves and Maokai and Janna and Ryze, and their top lane was a little flexible, and that was about it. Vladimir is a very common choice in their team picks as well. But on digression for the main point, basically, excuse me, basically the entirety of their team strategy was revolved around the fact that they were able to have this standard team composition that could do whatever it wanted to in the early, the mid, and late game stages, but as an overall overarching kind of cheese strategy, they would ignore players, push down towers, lane swap, and generate some sort of early advantage to propel themselves forward into the later stages of the game. And teams like TSM, Black, and Curse just couldn't adapt to this strategy as quickly as they should have been. So the overall strategy that Azubu Blaze was employing, not cheese, but they were using a little bit of cheese in there in order to get themselves to the end point of the game. Pushing down towers and everything, It's a cheese strategy. They're going for a pre-10-minute tower push to generate some sort of advantage and let the rest of the team roam around to give an unfair advantage into another lane that's in their favor. So, by definition, pushing down towers like that very, very aggressively, it's cheese play style. Level 1 invades on an Amumu, kind of a cheese play style, because if you succeed on invading against that Amumu, well, you basically shut him down until he's level 6, but by that time, your own jungler is like level 9 because Amumu can't go to the jungle without a blue buff. And if you deny that second blue buff, because they're probably going to have to donate that back to Amumu to try to catch him up, then Amumu's just completely shut out of the game. So doing something like that where Amumu's not going to be able to do anything before the first 10 minutes of the game, pretty much a cheese strategy. Although it's very wide accepted and it's a viable strategy, like I said, cheese strategies are viable strategies. They're just a little bit cheap, and some people get pissed off at them. But a lot of people are going to get pissed off if you lose, regardless of what you're doing. In addition to the Zubu Blaze kind of push strategy, one of the other things I've seen being thrown around are different kind of push strategies. Something akin to what Epic Gamer did at IPL 3 against TSM, which is Run Dandin's Heimerdinger. Now, although it's not traditional cheese because the game did end fairly quickly. It ended within 25 minutes. So it was an aggressive strategy, albeit one to kind of stave off the mid lane farm and everything. But in addition to, providing some sort of pressure onto Original in the mid lane, it also, the rest of the team comp is interesting as well. You have a Caitlyn and Caitlyn and Soraka in the bottom lane. You have a Morgana solo top coming out from Crumbs. You have Heimerdinger in the mid lane, and Dyer's playing Trundle in the jungle. In addition to this, I just want to point out very quickly, TSM pulls off a lane swap here with Udyr on the bottom lane soloing 1v2, and Ezreal and Sona going up against Morgana in that top lane. It's a very interesting kind of how this is last year in October, and we're seeing some things that have been surfacing recently, like Westrice here, if the thing wants to play, ignoring Udyr and taking pot shots at the tower, like Clairvoyance being run still, the lane swap going down. It's a lot of interesting things going down in this game. In addition to this, we see Epic Gamer a little bit later on in the VOD, if I can find the timer right here, using these double Heimerdinger turrets to take down dragons aggressively. Well, this is something we've seen out of teams, aggressive dragons and stuff like that. I mean, it seems like something TSM would do. It seems like something a team like M5 would do. Is it a cheesy strategy? Kind of. If we take a look, 10 minutes into the game, they're ahead by about 1,000 gold, maybe a little bit less. They're able to take down towers on top of this, or perhaps prevent the ridiculous farm that Reginald has, 73 underneath that YouTube bar to Heimerdinger's 51. If they're able to maybe get a jungler that has more of a lockdown capability like a Maokai on their team next time around, or, continue with the kind of poke comp they have with the Piltover Peacemaker, the Dark Binding, the Rockets with that Trundle, but do it a little bit earlier on and motion down with these teleports and make bigger plays happen, then they have something akin to, a very well thought out cheese strategy at their hands, now don't they? And it's kind of interesting to note that how some of these elements that Epic Gamer was employing last year at IPL 3 in October are now coming into fruition right now, and people are like, how the hell did these strategies come about? What is going on? These are cheese strategies. I can't believe teams are doing this, etc., etc., etc. They've been doing it for a very, very long time, ladies and gentlemen. It's just that it's come to light recently because of the state of the North American League of Legends scene. Now, like I said, now that we know what cheese is, why do we have to know about it? Well, it's because it's a very pivotal point in time of the North American League of Legends scene. This weekend, as I mentioned, is MLG Raleigh. Next weekend is the North American Regional Finals at PAX Prime. Now, very, very quickly, if I'm going to pull up, let's go to Leaguepedia really quickly, because I love the guys over at Leaguepedia. If we can pull this up very quickly, we'll have a little bit of dissection into the North American scene to show why cheese might be an issue very soon. Now we can see these two teams here, Solo Mid and CLG Prime, unfortunately not going to be in attendance. But however, they already have enough circuit points to lock pretty much first and second place. With the recent IPL face-off, Team Solo Middle was able to garner themselves 400 extra points. Now, the only thing that's going to happen here is if Dignitas takes first place, because the rest of these teams here are going, in addition to some relatively unknown teams, such as, Team Marn, Unrestricted, other teams just like that. But, Dignitas, they take a first place, they'll actually bump up ahead CLG Prime. Curse, of course, if they take first place and Dignitas does not take, or if Dignitas takes Second place? No, that's going to stay the same there. But if Dignitas takes like third place, then Curse is going to bump ahead of Dignitas. And there's all these little politics that are going on in the North American scene right now. But what's really, really interesting is the teams basically from 6th place, and then including this 9th place team, which will not qualify for PAX, you have to be 8th or higher. And this is the dynamic going on here. Not to be fooled with team dynamic, but what you're going to have is this kind of power struggle. If any of these teams finish above the other teams, they have a chance of knocking them down pretty much. Team Dynamic is in the relatively safe position right now. I believe they have to get top 8 in order to just secure themselves into a spot in the finals, no matter who else winds up taking places. And it does look like I'm being invited to games while I'm in the middle of the show. Sorry, guys. But regardless of who is going to be taking what place, as long as Team Dynamic can solidify themselves until I believe it's the top 8 spot, they're going to get into PAX no matter what, whether it be in 6th, 7th, or 8th place. Legion and MTW, now Monomaniac, are going to be in a little bit of a different spot. If Orbit or any of these other teams below wind up finishing in the top 4 or possibly in the top 2, those teams could potentially knock one of these other teams out. Orbit, especially, if they are able to finish in top 4 and MTW and Legion do not, well, that just means that Orbit is going to knock MTW, now Monomaniac, out of that 8th place spot and take their own, and then Legion is going to be moving down to the 8th place spot. If one of those teams, an Unrestricted, a Marn, or a Meat Playground, wind up taking in the top 4 as well, that means both Legion and Monomaniac, old MTW, are both going to be knocked out. So stakes are very, very high because this is the last event to garner these circuit points before PAX Pride next weekend and before the North American Regional qualifiers. The top 3 teams from that are going to move on to the Season 2 finals, October 13th, or mid to late October, when that's going to be going down in LA. So a lot of people are going to be trying to employ these cheese strategies to garner an early game advantage and mind game their opponent into basically not being able to do anything, throwing them off their game and knocking them into the losers bracket round, or knocking them out of the tournament from the losers bracket round and knocking them out of contention for a place in Season 2 finals. So this is a very, very high stakes tournament, and we've seen this out of other high stakes tournaments. WCG, I believe it was, or WCS, one of the two. There was a player, I believe he's from Europe, and his name was Action Jesus. Action Jesus was a random player in StarCraft 2, also in Brood War. What he did was he did cheese strategies. All he did was cheese. No matter what you were going to be facing off against, he cheesed. But he did different cheese strategies, and he played random. So you never knew what race he was. You never knew what cheese strategy was coming at you. All you knew is that you had to play defensive. And Action Jesus wound up taking wins off some top players because all he would do is cheese. These relatively unknown teams are all Action Jesus. Meat Playground, Unrestricted, Marn if they're able to attend. Any of these teams could come in here and take games off of anybody in the North American scene. That is one thing the North American scene has over Europe and Korea, where basically if you're not TSM and you're not CLG, or maybe even not Dignitas, you can lose or win against anyone else in the scene. So employing cheese strategies is a legitimate way to throw your opponents off their game and solidify yourself for that W, as opposed to giving your opponents the L, and to borrow a term from the fighting community, letting them hold that L as you continue on to the Season 2 qualifiers at PAX Pride next weekend. So cheese strategies are going to be something that every single team is going to either need to know how to employ, how to defend against, or both to have a really, really good understanding. And this is where I think TSM made a big mistake. Now, I'm not a professional player. I don't know their schedules. I don't know anything like that. But if I were somebody who knew that cheese strategies were going to be used this weekend and the following weekend, rather than stay home and watch them and try to just basically dissect what's going on, what I would do is I would get out there, go to the tournament that I know I have a good chance of winning because I have solid team mechanics, play my basic team compositions to make sure we're practice the characters that I might want to bring into new fruition, such as Dyrus on Aurelia, or maybe get Reginald to practice his Twisted Fate a little bit more. Bring it into this tournament and be confronted with the cheese strategies head on. So right in the middle of the game, you know the on-the-fly decisions you have to make in order to combat these. If TSM gets knocked out of the tournament early on due to cheese strategies, a lot of people are going to give them a lot of crap. I'll give it to them there. So maybe you don't want to have to deal with that as a demotivational thing going into the Season 2 qualifiers at PAX Prime. That's fine. However, you are going to have experience against these cheese strategies, as I'm waving my pen very ferociously towards my viewers out there in internet land. But you're going to have experience against these cheese strategies and then a week to prepare in order to combat them. Now, one thing that TSM's not going to be able to do while MLG is going on is practice. Who are they going to practice against? CLG is in Korea, and I don't think CLG wants to practice against TSM right now to give up their strategies. No one else is going to be around for them to practice with. They're going to be solo queuing against nobody because they're all going to be at MLG. So TSM is only going to have themselves and footage to study. And, you know, not to rag on anybody or anything, but at the League of Legends arena, you know, Chaos and Special had a decent understanding of the film on Azubu Blaze, but they weren't able to translate that film watching into executed strategy, which is something that they really need to work on. So from just an outsider's perspective, I don't understand why they're not going to run into these things head on. The best part is, if you're TSM in this situation, you don't have to show your hand of anything. You could go in there and play the same strategies that people always see you play, and you can have these cheese strategies thrown at you early because they need these qualifier points to advance to PAX Prime. Then you take your strategies, and if you beat the cheese strategy, you already have a solution, or you already know how to deal with it. If not, you go back home, and a couple days before PAX Prime, you look at the VODs, you've already played against it, so you know what they're going to be thinking about and going through their heads while they do this. You know how they've moved in motion throughout the game, and then you're going to be able to respond with your own team composition you've kept a secret this entire time, because everybody's trying to beat the tried and true normality that you do. So I think TSM is giving up a huge advantage going into this finals for the North American region because they're basically in the driver's seat and they can control how the ebb and flow of these cheese strategies affect them, and basically they control their own fate. And right now they're kind of letting go a little bit by not going to MLG. But like I said, it could be just the fact that if they do go in and they do wind up getting knocked out by a cheese strategy, internet is very unforgiving. And you don't want to actually have a bunch of people berating you, be like, oh, I can't believe you lost, etc., when you know you're the top team in America, or North America, especially because you have the most circuit points. You've won all these trophies, you've won all these events, you know that you're good. You don't want unnecessary flack kind of ragging you down, being like, oh, well, you lost to a cheese strategy, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. If TSM is going to be able to sit back and watch these games, though, and identify those cheese strategies and figure out how to work with them a little bit better than they did against Azubu Blaze and studying their film, they're going to be perfectly fine. I could be completely wrong with this, and they might not even need the experience at Raleigh in order to deal with these strategies, which would be awesome because that shows the evolution of the entire North American League of Legends scene, and that's something that, you know, as a caster and just as a member of the community, I absolutely love to see because that means the game is growing and it's going to gain more of a global presence. And of course, we're going to have the established factor that North American teams are going to be able to compete, if not absolutely destroy, these Korean and European teams as well. So it's something you really just want to, you know, keep in the back of your head and just think about. Now, as far as the overall cheese strategies go and what we could kind of expect to see out of Raleigh, well, it's a little bit tough to call at this point in time. I mean, you know what? Let's take a look at the champion list. Let's do that. As you can see, there are all these different champions. The game is going to be played on the Diana patch, so you don't have to worry about Rengar or anything. We've already seen teams such as ELO Hell employing things like Solomon Evelyn, which, unfortunately for Shishay, did not really work out in his favor. However, this doesn't mean that the rest of the teams aren't going to try something equally as nutty. One thing that we've seen in Tower Siege compositions has been Kog'Maw, but the resurgence of Caitlyn. Caitlyn is a very, very aggressive bottom lane champion. Despite being a little bit squishy and not having the most escapes in the world, she deals very, very well against one of the top AD carries today, and that is Graves. She outranges Graves, outranges his buckshot, and the best part is if Graves tries to get in close with a quick draw, she's able to net away. And not only this, but she's going to slow Graves down and generate some sort of advantage against him. So Graves, I've actually seen in solo queue as well as competitive tournament play recently, Caitlyn has been giving Graves a very, very hard time. So her combined with some sort of tower sieging strategy built around the fact she has one of the longest ranges for an AD carry in the game base is just a very, very effective strategy. Something else that we've seen a lot recently has been the Blitzcrank meta. Blitzcrank has been known as a very aggressive support character because of his AoE silence, his grab, and his knockup. But in addition to this, Blitzcrank is, you know, he's a little bit vulnerable as well. He doesn't have any sustain on his champion, so he's not going to be able to keep his bottom lane character laning with him alive if they get into some sort of aggressive kind of lane. One thing that we've seen is a resurgence of the character Nunu. Nunu is a bigger bully in the bottom lane than basically Blitzcrank. he's hard as a rock to get through if you're dealing damage. And on top of this, taking one level of consume basically ensures the survivability all the way up to like level 8 in that bottom lane. So Blitzcrank is going to be going against a Nunu. Not only is Nunu going to zone him out with these ice blasts, he's going to have consume to just stave off any damage being dealt to him in the bottom lane. And then by giving Blood Boil to his support, whether it's a Caitlyn who needs the extra attack speed and movement speed to really dominate that bottom lane, or that Kog'Maw that we've seen for a very, very long, we haven't seen for a very, very long time, Nunu is a great counter to this very Blitzcrank heavy metagame. In addition to this, on the bottom lane for supports, keep an eye out for very non-traditional support characters. This includes all these non-sustained champions. No Jannas, no Sorakas, no Sonas, Blitzcrank, Nunu, and in addition to this, characters that maybe you not normally won't think to be in a support kind of role, such as Nautilus. Now this is pretty much a shot in the dark right here, but this is something else that I've seen from observing players in solo queue. Nautilus is kind of like a Blitzcrank on steroids. He has a stun built into his staggering blow passive. In addition to this, he has his own hook and dredge line, which isn't necessarily going to put your range carry in as much danger as a Blitzcrank pull because it halves the distance between you. He has his own shield to keep himself healthy during these engagements, an AoE slow that deals a decent amount of damage, and then the ultimate, which is devastating come team fight time. So maybe picking up a Nautilus to go with that bottom lane, or maybe the resurgence of Nautilus in the jungle, is something we really need to keep our eyes peeled for. Motioning towards the jungle, though, we've seen resurgence of not only Rammus being played almost exclusively by St. Vicious and Legion's jungler Latamortis, who uses his taunt in addition to his power ball to crowd control and get between lanes very, very quickly and very, very effectively, but also being basically nothing but a tank that people have a very, very hard time taking down until his defensive ball core runs out, or when he gets to the mid to late game where he's hard to kill regardless of having that. But in addition to this, we've also seen a resurgence of Shaco junglers. Hotshot GG has been playing this a lot in solo queue, in addition to something along the lines of a Fiddlesticks. But the thing is with Shaco, he's been known for very, very early aggressive ganks, especially after starting red, or perhaps boxing up the enemy jungle to get a little bit of counter jungling while continuing on his own very, very safe path. Getting that early red or blue, ganking very early with this Deceive. He has a slow on his 2-shift poison. In addition to this, Jack in the Boxes in random places of the jungle can cut off enemy junglers extremely easily. Putting boxes between an enemy's blue buff and Wraith camp in that one bush towards their middle lane could be devastating if they're a jungler that does not survive at very high HPs, or if they're a jungler that's not going to be going for that very, very quick red buff, saving Smite for it. So having a Shaco on your team could be very, very devastating to your opponents if you're going for this aggressive strategy. Another thing I've seen a resurgence in, which is a little bit more useful and tactile that we've seen before, has been a resurgence of Mr. Lee Sin in the jungle. Now, the Blind Monk has been seeing a lot of top play, especially from players like Legion's Cruiser the Bruiser, but he has been recently being played in the jungle by basically every single jungler on North America. Thing is, with Lee Sin, he has very, very aggressive level 2 ganks after picking up that red buff, which is one of my favorite things in the world from League of Legends. I love Lee Sin level 2 ganks, especially when he first came out. But in addition to this, he has ridiculous mobility with Sonic Wave and Resonating Strike, in addition to Safeguard Iron Will, which will be able to move between wards, and not only that, but also minions and allies as well. He has ridiculous clearing capabilities with Tempest and Cripple, also being able to shut down unorthodox picks like an Akali or like that jungle Shaco, while having someone that is invisible on the enemy team. And then, of course, he has Dragon's Rage, where if you get in the perfect positioning for this, Lee Sin's going to be able to reset a team fight, or just basically pick out a target and completely disable them or remove them from a fight, or as Quickshot likes to say, instantly delete someone from a team fight engagement, which is ridiculously overpowered. We've also seen junglers like Shyvana and Nocturne running Smite and Exhaust and not going for that flash. Although Lee Sin doesn't have the guaranteed way to get in like Shyvana and Nocturne do with their ultimates, his high mobility also makes him a very prime target for running this Smite and Exhaust composition, whereas in the past we've seen players taking that Smite and Flash on Lee Sin, which is a little bit more standard. But having an Exhaust and having your skills honed for that Sonic Wave Resonating Strike and Safeguard Iron Will combination could make Lee Sin a very viable aggressive jungler choice. One of the things that we actually talked about with Lotta Mortis in a recent Sheen Prox interview was how we had a lot of supporty kind of utility junglers in the metagame, and they were falling off of aggressive junglers. This is something that people are going to have to keep in mind to try to combat these cheese strategies and combat these early aggressive junglers. If you're going for a kind of tower push strategy with aggressive level 2 ganks, if you like get a lane swap and gank the top lane aggressively at level 2, especially if you're on the purple side, a lot of people have been wanting to get on the blue side because they say it has some sort of innate advantage. If you're on the purple side, though, with an aggressive Shaco or Lee Sin, level 2 gank from that red buff on that lane swap top lane, so you have a 2v1, making it a 3v1 with a jungler, you can knock that tower down and net your team first blood, which is the kind of ridiculously cheesy advantage that I've been talking about since the beginning stages of this show. However, those utility junglers are someone that can try to combat this, because utility junglers have been the Achilles heel for aggressive junglers ever since the metagame pretty much came out for them. One of the prime examples is going to be the fact that even though Shyvana is a very aggressive jungler and a very aggressive counter jungler, she's going to be hindered from the fact that she does not have any real crowd control on her. Yes, her ultimate's going to be able to pull people in or remove people from a team engagement. However, she has no way to lock down someone that she is ganking aside from taking that exhaust I mentioned before on Lee Sin. Lee Sin, however, is going to be able to slow people down with that Tempest Cripple combination. Where'd Lee Sin go? There he is. You see right here, he's not only going to be able to do this, but he's going to be able to basically cripple people, reducing their movement and attack speeds, which is something that, you know, Shyvana doesn't have. Coupling exhaust on him, he's going to be a ridiculously hard champion to live against when you're ganking. Now, we have these kind of supporty utility junglers like a Maokai who have made their presence known because they have decent clear times, but in addition to this, they have a lot of crowd control and a lot of advantage that can be gained in their ganks that junglers like Shyvana typically don't have. Having these utility or support junglers going off against aggressive junglers is basically just a role to counter gank everybody. Something that we used to talk about Udyr doing a lot. Udyr was not the best champion for ganking lanes unless your opponent was overextended, but he was an absolute monster at counter ganking the enemy jungler. So Udyr might actually come into play to counter gank these aggressive jungle picks like Shyvana or perhaps like Lee Sin. One thing that Udyr lacks over these champions, though, is a reliable source of mobility. He has his bear stance, but still, people can outrun bear stance rather easily, especially if they're packing a support character like Janna on their team. So these are all very interesting things that could come into play. And one more strategy I just really want to touch upon. We watched it in the Epic game. It's not really a cheese strategy, although it can win games very, very early, and CLG has been known to employ stuff like this as well, is kind of a poke composition. Running a jungler like Trundle to soak up a lot of damage and put some distance between yourself and the enemy team with a Pillar of Filth. Running that Caitlyn or Kog'Maw that we were talking about in that AD carry position. Maybe a double AP composition with someone who has poking power like a Kennen in that top lane. Be able to throw those shurikens down, or maybe even go AD to throw your opponents for a little bit of a loop. But mostly also relying on the fact of someone along the lines like a Lux, who we've seen a little bit of play from Nijaki, in addition to Froggen on the EU servers, or actually Korea servers right now, or maybe a resurgence of our all-time favorite hotshot Nidalee GG AP mid or AP top Nidalee to poke people down with these spears. Siege compositions, not necessarily the most cheesy strategy in the world, and it could lead to very long and drawn out games, but it is a strategy that can give you that early advantage. You can just ride into the late game and your opponents really can't respond to this. Really quick, I want to shout out on ggChronicle. Our resident writer Holy Spork has actually written some articles on the poke composition as well as an AoE composition, which is kind of a counter to some of these cheese strategies as well. So you guys can go over to ggChronicle.com and check out Spork's articles just to get a little bit better understanding on the overall team compositions, and maybe you'll be able to use them on your own, if not just identify them and see what's going on at MLG Raleigh this weekend. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm actually taking up a little bit more than I thought I would in the first place, going for like that 45-minute mark that I try to do at most of my in the zones. So last week we went for almost over an hour, and now this time we're going for approaching about the 45-minute mark, if not a little bit over right now. So hopefully you guys have not only learned what cheese is, but identified some of the strategies that cheese is basically related to, why people use cheese and how it is a very effective strategy if used properly, how cheese can fail very, very badly, as in the case of Team Black, unfortunately, against TSM in that League of Legends arena match for MLG. But you can also identify why teams are going to have to face off against it, how they're going to be able to face off against it, and what champions you can kind of hope to see at MLG Raleigh this weekend, where myself and Monte Cristo will be casting. Once again, guys, I see a lot of people tuning in a little bit later. If you do want to watch, I'm going to put the VOD up on the ggChronicle YouTube. That's youtube.com/ggChronicle. Probably within the next hour or two. It's also going to be on the website at ggChronicle.com, so you can always stop by and check it out there while you're going to be looking at Holy Sports articles as well. But in addition to this, guys, sit back, enjoy our coverage of MLG Raleigh. We're going to have a lot of interactivity going on with our live stream and our live coverage program going on. Mr. Matt Demers over there from Spike Club joining the ggChronicle staff is going to have some really, really cool things with that. In addition to this, you're going to be getting live updates from the venue from myself, Monte Cristo, and any of the other members of GDC that are attending MLG Raleigh. If you guys want to check out the VOD, like I said, it'll be available on the YouTube in just a little bit. You guys could probably catch it sometime later on tonight before you guys go to bed. But I got to get out of here. I got to pack. I got to make sure I got all my flight stuff sorted out, and I got to play some League of Legends before I go to Raleigh myself. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks once again for tuning to episode 34 of In The Zone. My name is Optimus Tom, part of ggChronicle production. In addition to that, we'll see you guys at Raleigh, and hopefully you know now what Cheese actually is. So, you guys can identify it before I do, probably, while I'm casting the event. So, other than that, guys, I'm going to skedaddle. Hopefully you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again next week for more In The Zone.
Talk no